And I asked my professors if recessions and depressions were necessary. And I never got a straight answer. They would always go into economic history and say, well, you know, there have been recessions and depressions periodically, and the inference was that because there had been recessions and depressions periodically, that they were endemic to the system, that they had to happen. That was the total explanation. Well, I was not satisfied with that explanation, so I did my own research and read a lot of books and came to the conclusion that they were not necessary. And 60 years later, I am still even more convinced than I was then that they're not necessary. There have been 25 recessions and depressions since 1890, and not one of them was necessary. Every single one was a function of some aspect of the banking system. An absolutely brilliant governor of the Bank of Canada, Graham Towers, the first governor, and I would say, because I've watched them all, unquestionably the brightest of them all. He devised a system that worked. In 1938, there were no job openings in Canada, not one, that I know of. In 1939, the war comes along, and what happens? Pretty soon, everybody's working. People are joining the armed forces, others are building factories, some are making munitions, but everybody was involved. And I think a fair question is, where did they get the money to do all that? Well, the Bank of Canada printed it. P-R-I-N-T-E-D, printed. And the way it worked is this way. The Bank of Canada bought government bonds for cash. The government paid the Bank of Canada interest on those bonds. But the Bank of Canada, which was publicly owned thanks to Mackenzie King, paid the interest back to the government as dividends. So the net cost of the money was just above zero, just the cost of administration deducted. The money that the government spent into circulation wound up in the private banks. And it became what the economists called high-powered money. Sydney's been calling it the reserve. That's what it was. And they used this high-powered money as their reserves to increase their lending capacity, because greater reserves allow them to lend more. And so they used the money to lend to people building factories or buying war bonds and so on. In effect, the money creation system in Canada was shared between the Government of Canada through the Bank of Canada and the private banks. And this was the system that got us out of the Depression, helped finance the war, helped finance the post-war infrastructure, including the St. Lawrence Seaway, Trans-Canada Highway, and the big airport terminals that we were building, and helped lay the foundation for our social security network. And it continued until 1974 and gave us the best 25 years of the 20th century. And I remember them better than quite a few of you. There may be one or two here that have some recollection of that period. In 1974, the Bank of Canada, in concert with central banks all over the world, changed the system and adopted the ideas of Milton Friedman. Friedman was proposing a basically deregulated system, laissez-faire. Let the banks make the rules. And to change from a cash reserve system to what they call a capital adequacy system. Well, they should have called it a capital inadequacy system, because that's what it proved to be 2 years ago. And it was inevitable. One of the books I've got on sale here, which is a an updated version of one that was published in 1996, forecast the meltdown in the first two paragraphs. Because I knew it was going to happen. And I can tell you this, if they don't change the system, it'll happen again. With the same kinds of consequences of people losing their jobs, their houses, their farms, their businesses, and a slice of their retirement income. Because that's the way the system works. And that's the way it's designed to work. When the meltdown came, I wasn't really taking any satisfaction out of having been right. Because whenever this happens, it was the same thing as I saw in the 30s, but not quite as bad. People hurt. And already the Prime Minister's calling for cutbacks. He's not saying stimulate more. He's arguing with the President about that. He's not saying stimulate more and get people back to work and get the economy up to speed again. He's saying cut back, cut back. Well, what does that mean? It means cutbacks in services, in healthcare, in postponing infrastructure and transportation systems for the Greater Toronto Area, and taking lunch privileges away from students in schools, and threatening to shut down pools in the high schools. And all of these things are happening which are bad, but which are not necessary. And that's the crime. People all over the world are suffering. In my book, the new one, Light at the End of the Tunnel, A Survival Plan for the Human Species, I say it is a crime against humanity in the exact meaning of those words to have people suffer like that all around the world when it's not necessary, when something can be done about it. But this isn't the end of the road next Sunday. This is just the first skirmish. And between now and in Seoul, where the real decisions will probably be made, the most important decisions, we have to educate enough people that they can put on the kind of political pressure that politicians will take note of. Because unless there is political pressure, the politicians are going to be in the pockets of the bankers. The banks always, when they could do it here, gave the major parties $50,000 a year and $50,000 extra at election time, or any other excuse they could find. And, you know, you just have to wonder if it ever had any influence. I don't know that it did, but it certainly is not a good thing. And the only kind of influence that we can exert is through the ballots and threatening to use our ballots to punish any person running for office who doesn't pledge to promote and vote for monetary reform. The banking monopoly on printing money has got to end once and for all time. And I have a formula in the book that you'd be interested in. We can talk about it later if there's time. But something has got to be done, and I say we should base it on the Canadian precedent that was set between 1939 and 1974, and reinstate cash reserves so that the governments all over the world can start printing money, and the cash has to be held by the banks, which is part and parcel of what it is, and base a world system on that model, because it will work. It has been proven to work. So I just urge you in the next 8 or 10 months to do everything you can. If you're union members, get the union chiefs to hold seminars and summer studies for the members, and get them up to speed on this issue, so that when the next time comes around, we're ready for them, and we're not just protesting, but that we're out saying, this is what we want you to do, and if you don't do it, heaven help you when you come to try and get elected next time around. So let's get together and take the thing in our own hands and try and upset the banking cartel before it's too late for the future of the world.